My name is Ethan. I'm 31 years old, and the day I paid off my parents' mortgage was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of my life. Instead, it became the day I realized that sometimes the people who raised you never really see you at all. But to understand how I got there, I need to take you back to the beginning, to a childhood in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, where the summer heat could crack pavement and family expectations could crack a person just as easily. I grew up in a modest ranch-style house in Tempe, one of those neighborhoods built in the 70s where all the houses looked basically the same. Tan stucco, red tile roofs, desert landscaping with rocks and cacti because grass was too expensive to water. The Arizona sun was relentless, turning car steering wheels into branding irons and making the air shimmer above the asphalt in waves. Our house had evaporative cooling that barely worked, so summer meant sleeping with fans pointed directly at your face and waking up sticky with sweat. My father worked as an electrician, coming home every evening with his shirt dark with perspiration and his hands calloused and scarred. My mother was a secretary at an insurance company, her desk covered with photos of my older sister Melissa and me, always smiling for the camera even when we weren't smiling inside. Melissa was 3 years older than me, and from the moment I have memories, she was the star of our family. She was beautiful in that effortless way some people are, with our mother's blonde hair and blue eyes, tall and graceful where I was average and awkward. She was a cheerleader in high school, homecoming queen, the girl everyone wanted to be friends with or date. She got decent grades without really trying, had a million friends, and seemed to float through life on a cloud of natural charm and good luck. My parents adored her, and honestly, I did too. It was hard not to. Melissa had this way of making you feel special when she paid attention to you, like you were the only person in the world who mattered. I was different, quieter, more serious, the kid who preferred reading to parties and who got anxious in large groups. I wasn't bad-looking, but I wasn't striking like Melissa. I was smart, really smart actually, but in a way that made me seem nerdy rather than impressive. I got straight A's because I worked obsessively hard, staying up late to perfect every assignment, rereading textbooks until I understood every concept. My parents were proud of my grades in an abstract way, the same way you might be proud of a well-maintained lawn. It was expected, appreciated, but not particularly exciting. The difference in how they treated us was subtle but constant. When Melissa brought home a B, it was celebrated with her favorite dinner and praise for trying her best. When I brought home an A-, my father would ask what happened with that minus. When Melissa needed money for new clothes or to go out with friends, it appeared without question. When I asked for money for a book or a school trip, there were questions about whether it was really necessary, whether I could find it cheaper, whether I'd saved up my allowance. I told myself it wasn't favoritism, that they just had different expectations for each of us, that they loved us equally even if they showed it differently. Melissa went to Arizona State University, living at home to save money but treating college like a 4-year social event. She changed majors 3 times, from communications to marketing to hospitality management, never quite finding her passion but always having a great time looking. My parents paid her tuition without complaint, helped her buy a car when she turned 20, supported her through a series of boyfriends and breakups and drama that seemed to constantly swirl around her like a dust storm. When it was my turn for college, I knew I wanted to study computer science. I taught myself to code in high school, building websites and small programs, and I was good at it. Really good. I got accepted to several schools, including some prestigious ones out of state, but my parents sat me down and explained that they couldn't afford to send me away. They'd stretched themselves thin helping Melissa, and with the mortgage and bills, they needed me to stay local. I could go to ASU like my sister, live at home, and they'd help with tuition. It made sense financially, and I didn't want to burden them, so I agreed. Except their help with my tuition turned out to be different than their help with Melissa's. They paid for her classes outright. For me, they co-signed loans, explaining that it would help me build credit and learn financial responsibility. I worked part-time throughout college, 20 to 30 hours a week at a computer repair shop, to cover my expenses and help with the loan payments. I watched Melissa go to parties and football games and spring break trips while I worked and studied and tried not to feel resentful. I graduated in 3.5 years with a degree in computer science and a job offer from a tech company in Scottsdale. The salary seemed enormous to me at the time. $55,000 a year, more than my father made as an electrician. I moved into a small apartment, started paying off my student loans aggressively, and threw myself into work. I was good at my job, really good, the kind of employee who stays late and comes in early and volunteers for the difficult projects. Within a year, I got promoted. Within 2 years, I was leading a small team. Within 3 years, I was making 6 figures and had paid off all my student loans. Melissa, meanwhile, had graduated and moved back home. She worked a series of jobs in event planning and marketing, none of them lasting more than a year. There was always some reason. A difficult boss, a toxic work environment, a company that didn't appreciate her talents. My parents supported her through each transition, letting her live at home rent-free, helping with her car payments and credit card bills. When I suggested maybe she could try sticking with a job longer or consider a different career path, my mother got defensive, saying that Melissa was finding herself and that not everyone was as lucky as I was to find their calling right away. Lucky. That word stuck with me, as if my success was random chance rather than the result of years of hard work and sacrifice. When I was 26, I left my job to start my own software development company with 2 colleagues. It was terrifying, giving up the security of a steady paycheck to chase something uncertain. I maxed out my credit cards, worked 100-hour weeks, lived on ramen and coffee, and poured everything I had into making it work. My parents thought I was being reckless. My father told me I was throwing away a good job for a pipe dream. My mother worried I'd end up broke and struggling. Melissa said she admired my courage, but she could never do something so risky, as if risk-taking was a personality trait rather than a choice. The company struggled at first. There were months when I wasn't sure we'd make payroll, nights when I lay awake calculating how much debt I was accumulating and wondering if I'd made a catastrophic mistake. But slowly, painfully, we started to gain traction. We landed a few good clients, then a few more. We developed a reputation for quality work and reliability. By the time I was 28, the company was profitable. By 29, we were thriving. By 30, we were successful enough that a larger tech company approached us about acquisition. The acquisition process took months of negotiations, due diligence, and legal paperwork. I couldn't tell anyone what was happening, not even my family, because of confidentiality agreements. When it finally went through, when the money hit my bank account, I sat in my apartment staring at the number on the screen and couldn't quite process it. After the split with my partners and paying off business debts and taxes, my share was just over $3 million. I was 30 years old and financially set for life if I was smart about it. The first thing I felt was relief. The second thing was excitement about what I could do with this money. And the third thing, the thing that stuck with me, was a desire to do something meaningful for my parents. Despite everything, despite the favoritism and the different standards and the lack of support for my business, they were still my parents. They'd raised me, kept a roof over my head, fed me, sent me to college even if it was with loans. My father had worked his body to exhaustion for decades. My mother had spent years in a job she didn't particularly like to help support the family. And they were still struggling with that mortgage, still living paycheck to paycheck, still stressed about money. I started thinking about paying off their mortgage. The house wasn't worth much, maybe $250,000 in the Phoenix market, and they'd been paying on it for decades, so the remaining balance was probably around $100,000, maybe less. To them, that was an insurmountable sum, a weight they'd carry until retirement. To me, with my new financial situation, it was manageable. More than manageable. I could write a check and not even feel it. The more I thought about it, the more right it felt. I imagined my father's face when he found out he didn't have to make that mortgage payment anymore. The relief and joy and gratitude. I imagined my mother crying happy tears, maybe finally seeing that I'd done something significant, something that mattered. I imagined them telling people about their son who'd been so successful and generous, finally being proud of me in the same uncomplicated way they were proud of Melissa. I decided to do it anonymously as a surprise. I'd pay it off and they'd get a letter from the bank saying their mortgage had been satisfied, and then I'd reveal it was me. I contacted their mortgage company, navigated the bureaucracy of paying off someone else's loan, and wired the money. $107,000. Gone from my account in an instant. The mortgage company said they'd send official notification within a week. I felt good about it, really good. I imagined the moment of revelation over and over, planning exactly how I'd tell them, what I'd say. I decided to wait until they got the letter from the bank, let them be confused and amazed, and then show up at their house and tell them it was me. I gave it 10 days to make sure the letter arrived, and then I drove to Tempe on a Saturday afternoon, my heart pounding with anticipation. It was late October, that brief window when Phoenix weather is actually pleasant, warm but not scorching, with clear blue skies and a dry breeze. I pulled up to my childhood home and saw both my parents' cars in the driveway, along with Melissa's. Even better, I thought. The whole family would be there for the big reveal. I walked up to the front door, noticing that the desert landscaping looked a bit overgrown. The stucco could use a fresh coat of paint. Small things I could help them fix now that they didn't have a mortgage payment to worry about. I was about to knock when I heard voices from inside, loud enough to carry through the door. My father's voice, animated in a way I rarely heard it. I paused, my hand raised, and listened. "I'm telling you, it's the best decision we ever made," my father was saying. "Should have done it years ago. I still feel a little guilty," my mother's voice uncertain. "Don't," Melissa chimed in. "You've given him plenty over the years. More than plenty. At some point, he needs to stand on his own 2 feet. My hand dropped. They were talking about me. I stood frozen on the porch, my heart suddenly racing for a different reason. "He's always been so entitled," my father continued. "Ever since he got that fancy job, acting like he's better than us. Did you see his face at Christmas when we gave him that tool set? Like it was beneath him. He barely comes around anymore," my mother added. "Always too busy with work, too important for family dinners. And when he does come, he's got that attitude like he's judging everything." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I came around all the time. I never missed a family dinner unless I was traveling for work. And I'd loved that tool set, had thanked them profusely. What were they talking about? "The financial advisor said it was smart," my father said. "We're not getting any younger, and we need to think about our retirement. We've got one kid who appreciates what we do for her, who actually needs our help. Why should we keep Ethan in the will when he's already got more money than he knows what to do with?" The world tilted. The will. They were talking about cutting me out of their will. "He won't even notice," Melissa said. "Honestly, you're probably doing him a favor. This way there won't be any awkward conversations later. Clean break. It's not like we have that much to leave anyway," my mother said, sounding like she was convincing herself. "The house, some savings, your father's pension. Melissa needs it more. She's still finding her way. And she's given us grandchildren to look forward to," my father added. "Once she and Brad get married, we'll have a real family to leave a legacy to. Ethan's probably never going to settle down, too focused on his career." I stood there on the porch, the Arizona sun beating down on my back, and felt something inside me crumble. I just paid off their mortgage. $107,000. I'd done it out of love, out of gratitude, out of a desperate desire to finally do something that would make them see me, appreciate me, be proud of me. And they were in there, in the house I just freed them from debt on, talking about how entitled I was, how I didn't deserve to be in their will, how Melissa was the real family. I should have knocked. I should have walked in and confronted them, told them what I'd done, thrown it in their faces. But I couldn't move. I just stood there, listening to them continue to discuss my faults and shortcomings, building a case for why cutting me off was not just justified but generous. Finally, I turned around and walked back to my car. I sat in the driver's seat, hands shaking, and stared at the house I'd grown up in. The house that was now paid off mortgage-free because of me. And the people inside had no idea and were actively discussing how I didn't deserve their consideration. I drove back to my apartment in Scottsdale in a daze. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, analyzing every word, trying to understand how they could see me so differently than I saw myself. Entitled? I'd worked for everything I had. Distant? I called them every week, visited regularly, never missed important events. Judging them? I'd never said a critical word about their choices or their lives. But then I started thinking about it from their perspective, trying to see what they saw. Maybe my success made them uncomfortable. Maybe when I talked about my work, They heard bragging instead of sharing. Maybe my nice car and nice apartment felt like a reproach to their more modest lifestyle. Maybe I'd been so focused on proving myself, on achieving and succeeding, that I'd missed something essential about how to connect with them. Or maybe, a darker voice in my head whispered, they'd always preferred Melissa and were now just finding justifications for what they'd always felt. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to call them immediately, tell them what I'd done, make them feel guilty for what they'd said. Part of me wanted to never speak to them again, to let them wonder why I'd suddenly disappeared from their lives. Part of me wanted to demand the money back, to undo the gift I'd given in ignorance. But mostly I just felt sad. Sad that I'd spent 31 years trying to earn love that was apparently never going to be freely given. Sad that I'd sacrificed and worked and achieved, thinking it would matter, only to discover that none of it made a difference. Sad that my sister, who I'd never resented despite the obvious favoritism, was in there agreeing that I deserved to be cut off. The next morning, I got a call from my mother. My stomach clenched when I saw her name on the screen. For a wild moment, I thought maybe they'd found out about the mortgage, that the bank had called them. But when I answered, her voice was casual, normal. "Hi, honey. Just calling to see if you're coming to dinner next Sunday. Melissa and Brad are coming, and I'm making pot roast." I almost laughed at the absurdity. Less than 24 hours ago, she'd been discussing cutting me out of the will, and now she was inviting me to pot roast like nothing was wrong. "I'm not sure," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "I might have to work." "On a Sunday? Ethan, you work too much. You need to make time for family." The hypocrisy was stunning. "I'll let you know," I said, and ended the call before she could say more. Over the next few days, I did a lot of thinking. I talked to my therapist, someone I'd started seeing a year earlier to deal with work stress, but who'd become invaluable for processing family dynamics. She asked me what I wanted from the situation, what outcome would feel right to me. I didn't have a good answer. I didn't want their money or their house. I didn't even want an apology exactly. I wanted something I was starting to realize I was never going to get. For them to see me clearly, to value me for who I actually was, to love me without conditions or comparisons. 2 weeks after I'd paid off the mortgage, I got a text from my father. "Got some weird letter from the bank about the mortgage. Probably a scam. Going to call them tomorrow to sort it out." My heart started pounding. This was it. They were about to find out. I waited all the next day for a call, a text, something. Nothing came. Finally, that evening, I called my father. "Hey, Dad. You figure out that thing with the bank?" "Oh, that. Yeah, strangest thing. Apparently, someone paid off our mortgage. The whole thing. Bank says it's legitimate, the money cleared, we don't owe anything." His voice was confused but not particularly emotional. I waited for him to speculate about who might have done it, to express gratitude or amazement. Instead, he said, "We're thinking it might be some kind of bank error. Our financial advisor says we should get it in writing that we don't owe anything, just in case they try to come after us later for the money." "What if it's not an error?" I asked carefully. "What if someone actually paid it off for you? Who would do that? We don't know anyone with that kind of money just lying around." "Well, except you, I guess, but you've made it pretty clear you're focused on your own life." The words hit like a slap. I'd literally paid off their mortgage, and he couldn't even imagine I might have done it because he'd decided I was too selfish to do something like that. "What if it was me?" I said quietly. There was a long pause. "What? What if I paid off your mortgage? Would that be something you could imagine me doing?" Another pause, longer this time. "Did you?" His voice was strange, suspicious almost. "Would it matter if I did?" "Ethan, what are you talking about? Did you pay off our mortgage or not?" I took a deep breath. "Yeah, Dad. I did. A few weeks ago. I wanted to do something to help you and Mom, to take that stress off your shoulders. I was going to surprise you. But then, I trailed off, not sure how to continue." "But then what?" His voice had shifted, defensive now. "But then I came by the house to tell you, and I heard you talking. About cutting me out of the will. About how entitled I am. How distant. How I don't appreciate you. I heard all of it. Silence on the other end. Long, heavy silence. "You were eavesdropping?" he finally said, and I almost laughed at the absurdity of that being his response. "I was standing on your porch about to knock. You were talking loud enough for the neighbors to hear. And that's your response? Not thank you for paying off our mortgage? Or, sorry you heard us saying terrible things about you. But, you were eavesdropping? Now hold on, you're taking things out of context. What context makes it okay, Dad? What context makes it okay that I just gave you over $100,000? And you were in there talking about how I don't deserve to be in your will because I'm too successful and don't need your help. It's not about deserving, it's about need. Melissa needs. Melissa is 34 years old. I cut him off, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. She's been finding herself for over a decade while you and Mom support her. I put myself through college, paid off my loans, built a business from nothing, and the one time I try to do something generous for you, you can't even imagine I'd be capable of it because you've decided I'm selfish. That's not fair. We've always supported you. Have you? The question came out sharper than I intended. Because from where I'm standing, you supported Melissa. You paid her tuition outright while I took loans. You let her live at home rent-free for years while I was working 30 hours a week in college. You celebrated her mediocre achievements while treating my successes like they were expected or lucky. And now I find out you're cutting me out of your will, not because I've done anything wrong, but because I don't need your money. Do you have any idea how that feels? You're being dramatic. We were just talking, exploring options. We hadn't made any final decisions. You called me entitled, Dad. You said I act like I'm better than you. You said I barely come around, which is a lie, and that I have an attitude, which is also a lie. And Mom and Melissa agreed with all of it. So yeah, maybe I am being dramatic, but I just paid off your mortgage and then heard my entire family trash talk me. So I think I've earned a little drama. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end. What do you want, Ethan? You want us to grovel? You want us to thank you for something we didn't ask for? And there it was. The real issue. I'd done something they didn't ask for, something that made them uncomfortable, something that shifted the dynamic in a way they didn't like. I don't want anything, Dad. I wanted to do something nice for you. That's it. I didn't want gratitude or recognition or to be put in the will. I just wanted to help. But what I learned is that you don't see me at all. You see some version of me that you've created in your heads, and nothing I do is going to change that. So no, I don't want you to grovel. I don't want anything from you anymore. You're overreacting. I'm done, Dad. I'm done trying to prove myself to you. I'm done being compared to Melissa. I'm done being the bad guy in a story where my only crime was being successful. The mortgage is paid. Consider it my final contribution to this family. Do whatever you want with the will. Leave everything to Melissa. I genuinely don't care anymore. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, my heart racing, but underneath the adrenaline was something else. Relief. I'd finally said what I'd been holding in for years, maybe my whole life. My phone rang immediately, my father calling back. I declined the call. It rang again, declined again. Then texts started coming in. From my father, from my mother, and eventually from Melissa. I didn't read them. I turned off my phone and sat in the silence of my apartment, feeling like I just set down a weight I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it was there. The next few weeks were strange. I kept my phone off for 3 days, and when I finally turned it back on, there were dozens of messages and voicemails. I deleted them all without reading or listening. I blocked my family's numbers, not out of anger but out of self-preservation. I needed space to figure out who I was without the constant weight of their judgment and disappointment. I threw myself into work, taking on a consulting role with a startup that needed help scaling their infrastructure. I started going to therapy twice a week instead of once. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected, went on dates, took up rock climbing, filled my life with things and people that made me feel good instead of inadequate. About 2 months after the phone call with my father, I got an email from Melissa. She tracked down my work email, which I hadn't thought to block. The subject line was, "Please read this." Against my better judgment, I opened it. The email was long, rambling, defensive. She said I'd misunderstood what I'd heard, that they'd been talking hypothetically, that no one actually thought I was entitled or distant. She said I'd hurt Mom and Dad by cutting them off, that they were devastated and didn't understand what they'd done wrong. She said family was supposed to forgive each other, that I was being stubborn and prideful, that I needed to be the bigger person and reach out. Not once in the entire email did she acknowledge what I'd done by paying off the mortgage. Not once did she apologize for agreeing that I should be cut out of the will. Not once did she take any responsibility for the dynamic that had led to this point. It was all about how I was hurting them by my absence, how I needed to fix it, how I was the problem. I wrote back a single sentence. I'm not the one who needs to be the bigger person. I've been the bigger person my whole life. Then I blocked her email too. Time passed. Months turned into a year. I dated someone seriously for a while, a woman named Claire who worked in nonprofit management and had her own complicated family dynamics. We bonded over our shared experiences of never quite being enough for our parents, of achieving success that somehow made us the bad guys. The relationship eventually ended amicably, but it taught me that I wasn't alone in this experience, that lots of people carried similar wounds. I bought a house, a beautiful modern place in Paradise Valley with mountain views and a pool. I adopted a dog, a rescue mutt named Cooper who was loyal and loving and never made me feel like I had to earn his affection. I built a life that felt authentically mine, not a reaction to my family's expectations or a rebellion against their judgment, but something that genuinely reflected who I was and what I valued. I thought about my parents sometimes, wondered how they were doing, whether they ever thought about what had happened with anything approaching self-reflection. I wondered if they'd figured out that the problem wasn't that I was successful or distant or entitled, but that they'd spent my entire life making me feel like I wasn't quite good enough, and I'd finally stopped accepting that treatment. About 18 months after I'd cut contact, I ran into an old family friend at a coffee shop in Scottsdale. Mrs. Chun had lived next door to us when I was growing up, and she'd always been kind to me. She lit up when she saw me, gave me a big hug, and asked how I was doing. We chatted for a few minutes, and then she said, "Your parents must be so proud of you. I heard about your success with your company." I smiled tightly. "I'm not really in touch with them much these days." Her face fell. "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. They talk about you all the time, though. Your mother was just telling me last week about how you paid off their mortgage. She said it was the most generous thing anyone had ever done for them." I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. "She said that?" "Oh yes." She was practically in tears talking about it. "Said she didn't know how to thank you properly, that you'd given them such an incredible gift." Mrs. Chun looked at me with concern. "Is everything okay, Ethan?" I made some excuse and left quickly, my mind reeling. They were telling people about the mortgage. They were accepting credit for having a generous son while simultaneously having cut off all contact with that son. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. That night, I unblocked my mother's number and sent a single text. "Ran into Mrs. Chun today. Interesting hearing you've been telling people about the mortgage. Glad you're getting some mileage out of it." The response came within minutes. "Ethan, please, can we talk? I miss you. We all miss you." I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to believe it, wanted to think that maybe they'd learned something, grown somehow. But the larger part of me, the part that had spent a year and a half healing and building a life without their judgment, knew better. I wrote back, "You miss the version of me that made you feel good about yourselves. You don't miss the real me because you never actually knew the real me. I hope you're doing well. I hope the house is treating you nicely without that mortgage payment. But I'm not coming back to a relationship where I'm always going to be less than Melissa, where my successes are threatening instead of celebrated, where I have to earn love that should be freely given. Take care of yourselves." I blocked the number again before she could respond. That was 6 months ago. I'm 32 now, and I can honestly say I'm happier than I've ever been. I have friends who value me, work that fulfills me, hobbies that challenge me, and a life that feels authentically mine. I don't wake up anymore with that vague sense of not being enough. I don't measure my worth by whether my parents are proud of me. Sometimes I feel sad about it. I see other people with their families laughing and easy together, and I feel a pang of loss for something I never really had. I wonder if I'll regret this decision someday, if I'm being too harsh, if I should try one more time to build a bridge. But then I remember standing on that porch, hearing them discuss cutting me off while I just paid off their mortgage. I remember years of subtle and not-so-subtle messages that I wasn't quite right, wasn't quite enough, wasn't quite Melissa. And I remember how it felt to finally put down that weight, to stop trying to earn something that was never going to be given. I paid off my parents' mortgage in secret, thinking it would be a moment of connection and gratitude. Instead, it became the moment I realized that some relationships are built on foundations too broken to repair, and that walking away isn't giving up, it's choosing yourself. And for the first time in my life, I chose myself, and it turned out to be the best decision I ever made. If you've made it to the end of my story, thank you for being here. If you've ever felt like you weren't enough for your family, like your achievements were threatening instead of celebrated, like you were always being compared to someone else and coming up short, I want you to know you're not alone. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is set boundaries, even when those boundaries mean walking away. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment saying, "I'm with you until the end," so I know there are others out there who understand. And if you found value in hearing my experience, I'd really appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because there are more stories like this, more truths that need to be told, and I'd love to have you along for the journey. There's another story waiting for you right now, one that might speak to your heart just like this one did. Thank you for listening.